Imagine you're trapped on top of one of the highest mountain ranges on Earth. No food, no shelter, no rescue. Around you lies nothing but endless snow stretching farther than your eyes can see. The temperature drops below minus 30 degrees Celsius. Every breath burns your lungs. Every night could be your last. Now imagine surviving there, not for a few days, not for a week, but for 72 days. And when rescuers finally arrive, they discover something so shocking that it makes headlines around the world. To stay alive, these young survivors had been forced to make an impossible choice, one that most people pray they will never have to face. This isn't fiction. It isn't Hollywood. This really happened. It's the unbelievable story of the 1972 Andes flight disaster, one of the greatest survival stories in human history. But before the world called it a miracle, it began as an ordinary flight carrying a group of young rugby players who had no idea they were about to disappear into the mountains. October 12, 1972. 45 people boarded a small twin-engine Fairchild FH-227D aircraft at Carrasco International Airport in Montevideo, Uruguay. Most of the passengers belonged to the Old Christians Club rugby team. They were excited about an upcoming exhibition match in Santiago, Chile. The atmosphere inside the cabin was joyful. Some joked with teammates. Others sang songs. Parents smiled proudly as they watched the young athletes. Friends chatted excitedly about the trip ahead. For many of them, it was simply another adventure. The Andes Mountains stand like a giant stone wall between Argentina and Chile. Even today, experienced pilots treat them with great respect. Towering peaks, unpredictable winds, sudden storms, and thin air make flying there incredibly challenging. Back in 1972, technology was far less advanced than it is today. Pilots relied heavily on navigation calculations, radio signals, and experience. Bad weather forced the plane to stop overnight in Mendoza, Argentina. The next morning, October 13th, the weather seemed good enough to continue. It was Friday the 13th. For some, it was just another date. For others, it would become unforgettable. The aircraft lifted off and began climbing toward the towering Andes. At first, everything seemed normal. The passengers laughed. Some played cards. Others looked out the windows, amazed by the breathtaking white mountains beneath them. No one noticed the dangers slowly unfolding in the cockpit. Strong winds high above the mountains pushed the aircraft off course. The pilots believed they had already crossed the highest peaks and were approaching Chile. Hidden beneath layers of clouds stood mountain peaks thousands of feet higher than they expected. The aircraft began descending, straight toward disaster. Then, one passenger noticed something outside. The mountains looked too close, much too close. Before anyone could react, the entire cabin exploded into panic. The pilots suddenly realized their terrible mistake. They desperately pushed the engines to full power, trying to climb over the towering peaks. But the aircraft was already too low, too late. With a deafening crash, the right wing slammed into solid rock. It tore away instantly. Several passengers seated near that wing were thrown into the freezing void. Seconds later, the left wing ripped off as well. Inside the cabin, people screamed. Luggage flew like deadly missiles. Seats ripped from the floor. The tail section broke away. Then the remaining fuselage, now nothing more than a metal tube, began sliding down the mountain at terrifying speed. It plowed through snow and ice for hundreds of meters before finally crashing to a violent stop inside a frozen valley surrounded by enormous peaks. Silence. The joyful flight that had begun only hours earlier had become one of the worst aviation disasters in South American history. But the nightmare was only beginning, because the survivors had no idea that help wasn't coming, and the mountain had no intention of letting them leave. When the aircraft finally stopped moving, the silence was almost impossible to comprehend. Only moments earlier, the cabin had been filled with laughter and conversation. Now it echoed with cries for help, groans of pain, and the icy wind howling through the jagged remains of the fuselage. The crash had happened at an altitude of more than 11,000 feet, over 3,500 meters above sea level. The air was thin, making every breath a struggle. Temperatures dropped well below freezing, especially after sunset. There were no trees, no animals, and no signs of civilization. Just endless snow and towering mountains in every direction. Out of the 45 people on board, 12 died during the crash or within minutes of it. Many others were critically injured. Some had broken legs. Others suffered fractured skulls, crushed ribs, or severe internal injuries. Several were trapped beneath twisted seats and wreckage. Despite their own injuries, those who could still move immediately began helping others. Among them was 24-year-old medical student Roberto Canessa. Though he had never faced anything like this before, he instinctively began treating the wounded with whatever was available. Another medical student, Gustavo Zerbino, joined him. With no proper medical supplies, they improvised splints from pieces of luggage and torn seat frames. Clothing became bandages. Seat cushions became pillows for the dying. Every small act of kindness mattered. One of the survivors, Nando Pardu, lay unconscious with a severe head injury. Many believed he was already dead. They placed his body beside the others who had not survived, expecting to move him later. Miraculously, he would wake up nearly 3 days later. His mother had died in the crash. His younger sister, Susanna, was alive but gravely injured. He didn't know any of this yet. As daylight faded, the survivors realized they needed shelter. The broken fuselage, though badly damaged, offered the only protection from the deadly cold. They blocked the open rear of the aircraft with luggage, seats, and pieces of metal to reduce the freezing wind. Everyone squeezed together as tightly as possible, sharing body heat in an attempt to survive the night. Sleep was almost impossible. The wounded cried out in pain. Others silently wondered whether they would ever see their families again. Outside, temperatures plunged far below freezing. Many feared they wouldn't survive until morning. Yet somehow dawn came, and with it, hope. Some survivors climbed onto the snow, waving clothing whenever they heard what sounded like aircraft engines. Before long, they saw planes flying high overhead. Everyone shouted. They waved. Some even used pieces of reflective metal to catch the sunlight. But the planes never changed course. At that altitude, the white fuselage blended almost perfectly into the snow-covered mountains. From the air, it was nearly invisible. Again and again, no one saw them. The survivors didn't know it, but search teams from Uruguay, Chile, and Argentina were desperately looking for Flight 571. Poor weather, inaccurate flight information, and the vastness of the Andes made the search incredibly difficult. Inside the wreckage, hope remained strong. "They'll find us tomorrow," many said. Then tomorrow came and went. Days passed. The little food they had recovered from the aircraft quickly disappeared. There were a few chocolate bars, a handful of candies, some small jars of jam, a few bottles of wine, a few packets of crackers. 45 people could survive on that for only a very short time. To make it last, they divided everything into tiny portions. 1 square of chocolate, half a biscuit, a spoonful of jam. It wasn't enough to satisfy anyone. It was only enough to delay starvation. As the days dragged on, hunger became unbearable. Their bodies burned precious energy just trying to stay warm in the freezing temperatures. Some chewed leather from suitcases. Others swallowed bits of cotton. They melted snow and pieces of metal to drink water because eating snow directly lowered their body temperature even further. Then came the moment that shattered what little hope they had left. On the 8th day after the crash, one survivor managed to repair a small transistor radio found among the wreckage. Everyone crowded around it. Finally, they would hear news about the rescue. The announcer's voice crackled through the speaker. Search teams had officially ended their search. Authorities believed there were no survivors. Flight 571 was now considered a complete loss. Inside the fuselage, silence fell. Some stared at the floor. Others broke into tears. For days they had survived because they believed help was coming. Now they understood the horrifying truth. If they were going to survive, they would have to save themselves. But there was one terrible problem. The food was completely gone. Nothing remained. No plants grew at that altitude. No birds nested there. No insects crawled across the snow. No animals wandered through the frozen wilderness. The mountains offered absolutely nothing to eat. Then someone quietly looked toward the bodies of their friends and family members, preserved by the freezing temperatures outside the wreckage. No one wanted to speak the thought aloud. It was too painful, too unthinkable, too horrifying. But starvation doesn't negotiate with morality. It demands a choice. And in the coming days, these young men would face one of the most impossible decisions any human being has ever had to make. A decision that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Starvation is unlike ordinary hunger. At first, it feels like an empty stomach. Then comes weakness. Your muscles begin to fail. Your thoughts become slow. Even speaking takes effort. Eventually, your body starts consuming itself, burning fat, then muscle, then vital organs just to stay alive. That was exactly what was happening inside the wreckage. Days had passed since the last scraps of food had disappeared. The survivors had already rationed every crumb. They had searched every bag, every pocket, and every corner of the aircraft. They even chewed on leather, cigarette filters, and cotton, hoping to fool their stomachs. Nothing worked. The hunger only grew worse. Every morning, they woke up weaker than the day before. Some became too exhausted to stand. Others spent hours staring blankly into the snow, conserving every ounce of energy. They all understood one terrible truth. If they did nothing, every single one of them would die. The idea that no one wanted to mention slowly became impossible to ignore. Outside the aircraft lay the bodies of those who had died in the crash. The freezing temperatures had naturally preserved them. Many of the survivors were deeply religious Catholics. The thought of eating human flesh was morally and spiritually unbearable. These were not strangers. They were classmates, teammates, close friends, brothers, and family members. Some broke down in tears just discussing the possibility. Others refused to even listen. They prayed for another solution. But the mountains offered none. One by one, they came to the same heartbreaking conclusion. The dead no longer needed their bodies. The living still had a chance to survive. Several survivors later explained that they thought about it in terms of sacrifice. If the situation had been reversed, they believed their own friends would have wanted them to do whatever was necessary to stay alive. It wasn't a decision made in desperation alone. It came after days of discussion, prayer, and unimaginable emotional pain. Even then, not everyone could bring themselves to do it immediately. Some waited longer. Others became physically sick afterward. It was, without question, the hardest decision of their lives. Yet that impossible choice gave them something they had almost lost. Time. Enough strength to think. Enough strength to move. Enough strength to hope. Years later, the survivors spoke openly about that decision. They emphasized that it was never an act of violence or disrespect. They never harmed anyone to survive. They only used the bodies of those who had already died, treating them with as much dignity as they could under unimaginable circumstances. When news of what they had done eventually reached the world, many people were horrified. But after hearing the full story, religious leaders, including representatives of the Catholic Church, expressed understanding, recognizing that they had acted under the most extreme conditions imaginable to preserve life. For the survivors, however, eating wasn't the end of their suffering. It was only the beginning of another battle. The cold continued to punish them every single day. The sun reflected off the snow with blinding intensity, burning their faces during the day, while nights brought temperatures so low that ice formed inside the fuselage. Simple tasks became exhausting. Walking a short distance left them gasping for breath because of the high altitude. Many had lost significant weight. Their clothes were torn. Their shoes were barely holding together. Still, they refused to give up. Some began climbing nearby slopes, hoping to spot a road, a village, or any sign of civilization. Instead, every climb revealed the same terrifying sight. Mountains. More mountains. An endless sea of snow stretching to the horizon. Each failed expedition crushed their spirits a little more. Yet every evening they returned to the wreckage, determined to try again another day. Then, just when it seemed things couldn't become any worse, the mountain struck again. While the survivors slept inside the fuselage one freezing night, they heard a sound unlike anything they had ever experienced. At first, it was faint. Then it grew louder. A deep, thunderous roar echoed through the valley. Someone shouted. Before anyone could react, a massive wall of snow came crashing down the mountainside. It was an avalanche. The cabin went completely dark. People screamed. Many were trapped beneath snow, unable to breathe. Some reached desperately toward tiny pockets of air. Others never got the chance. The mountain had returned, and this time, it was about to claim even more lives. For 17 days, the survivors had endured freezing temperatures, relentless hunger, and the crushing realization that the world had given up searching for them. Just when they believed they had adapted to life on the mountain reminded them who was in control. It happened in the middle of the night. Most of the survivors were asleep, packed tightly together inside the broken fuselage to preserve as much body heat as possible. Outside, fresh snow had been piling up for days. No one could see the danger gathering above them. Then, a deafening roar shattered the silence. At first, some thought it was another airplane. Others believed the wreckage was collapsing. But within seconds, they realized the horrifying truth. An avalanche was racing down the mountainside. Before anyone could escape, a massive wall of snow smashed into the fuselage with incredible force. The aircraft was instantly buried. Darkness swallowed everything. The impact threw survivors against one another. Snow burst through every opening, filling the cabin in seconds. People screamed for help. Some reached desperately toward the ceiling, trying to keep an air pocket open. Others were pinned beneath bodies and luggage. Breathing became nearly impossible. One survivor later recalled that the silence after the avalanche was even more terrifying than the noise itself. They could hear people crying out. Then, one voice disappeared. Then another, and another. Several survivors suffocated before anyone could reach them. Others died from the crushing force of the snow. The avalanche claimed 8 more lives. Among those who died was Arturo Noguera. Also lost was Liliana Methol, the only adult woman still alive after the crash. Throughout the ordeal, she had comforted the younger survivors like a mother, encouraging them to keep hope alive. Her death devastated the group. When the survivors finally managed to dig themselves free, they found that the fuselage was buried under several feet of packed snow. For nearly 3 days, they remained trapped inside. Their oxygen grew thinner. The air became damp and foul. Every breath felt heavier than the last. Using pieces of metal from the aircraft, they took turns digging toward the surface. Hour after exhausting hour, they carved a narrow tunnel through the snow. Finally, a beam of sunlight broke through. Fresh air rushed inside. For the first time in days, they could breathe properly. But stepping outside brought another painful realization. The avalanche had buried many of their remaining supplies. The little they still had was gone. Yet something remarkable was happening among the survivors. Instead of surrendering to despair, they began adapting. They learned from every disaster. Using insulation ripped from the aircraft's walls, waterproof fabric, electrical wire, and scraps of clothing, they created makeshift sleeping bags. It was one of the smartest decisions they made. Before then, every night had drained their strength as freezing temperatures robbed their bodies of precious energy. Now, by sleeping together inside the insulated bag, they could conserve enough warmth to survive the brutal nights. Small victories like this kept hope alive. As days turned into weeks, one question grew louder in everyone's mind. If rescue wasn't coming, should they go looking for civilization themselves? It was an almost impossible idea. The Andes are among the most unforgiving mountain ranges in the world. The peaks surrounding them rose thousands of feet higher than their crash site. The survivors had no climbing gear, no maps, no proper clothing, no experience in mountaineering. Still, remaining where they were seemed just as deadly. Several volunteers attempted short expeditions into the surrounding mountains. Each time, They struggled through waist-deep snow, battled freezing winds, and quickly exhausted themselves in the thin mountain air. When they reached the nearest ridge, their hearts sank. Beyond it lay nothing but more mountains. Peak after peak stretched endlessly into the distance. Some returned in tears. Others silently accepted what they feared most. They hadn't crashed near the edge of the Andes. They were deep inside them. It seemed impossible that anyone could walk out. But one survivor refused to let that thought become reality. His name was Nando Pardu. When he had awakened from his coma days after the crash, he learned that his mother had died instantly. His younger sister, Susanna, had survived for several days before dying from her injuries despite everyone's efforts to save her. In less than a week, Nando had lost almost his entire family. The grief was overwhelming, but instead of breaking him, it gave him purpose. The only chance, however small, was to leave. He looked toward the towering white peaks that surrounded them. Most people saw an impossible barrier. Nando saw the only road home. He quietly made a decision. If no one came to rescue them, he would cross the Andes himself, even if it killed him. It sounded like madness, but history would prove that this impossible idea was the one decision that changed everything. By December 1972, more than 2 months had passed since the crash. The survivors had endured hunger, freezing temperatures, crushing grief, and an avalanche that had nearly wiped them out. Every day they remained on the mountain, their chances of survival grew smaller. They all knew one thing. If someone didn't leave the crash site soon, no one would leave it alive. Nando Pardu volunteered without hesitation. Joining him was Roberto Canessa, the medical student who had spent weeks caring for the injured. A third survivor, Antonio Tintin Vizintin, would accompany them, carrying extra supplies for the first part of the journey. The 3 men prepared as best they could with the little they had. They stitched together scraps of fabric to make warmer clothing. They wrapped their feet with extra layers to protect them from the snow. Most importantly, they improved the makeshift sleeping bag made from aircraft insulation, a piece of equipment that would become the difference between life and death during the freezing nights. Before they left, the remaining survivors gathered around them. There were no dramatic speeches, no promises, only quiet handshakes, embraces, and silent prayers. Everyone understood the truth. This wasn't just an expedition. It was their final hope. On December 12th, they began climbing. Every step was torture. The snow reached their knees in places. The thin mountain air made breathing painfully difficult. The sun reflected off the brilliant white snow, burning their eyes and faces during the day, while the nights brought freezing temperatures that could kill an unprotected person in hours. Progress was painfully slow. Sometimes it took an hour to climb a distance that would normally require only minutes. Without it, the expedition would almost certainly have ended in tragedy. After several days, the 3 men reached the base of the highest mountain, standing between them and freedom. Looking up, it seemed impossible. The slope rose steeply toward the clouds. One wrong step could send them tumbling hundreds of feet down the icy mountainside. Still, they climbed, hour after exhausting hour, step by painful step, driven not by certainty, but by hope. Finally, after one final push, Nando Pardu reached the summit. He stopped, looked ahead, and his heart sank. He had expected to see green valleys, roads, or perhaps signs of Chile on the other side. Instead, there were more mountains, endless mountains. Snow-covered peaks stretched as far as the eye could see. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm him. Had they climbed all this way for nothing? But Nando refused to give up. He carefully studied the distant landscape. Far on the western horizon, he noticed something different. The mountain seemed lower. The snow appeared thinner. If they could just keep going, perhaps civilization lay beyond. They pressed forward. Their food was running low. To increase the chances of success, Antonio Vizintin returned to the crash site, leaving all the remaining food with Nando and Roberto. Now only 2 men continued the journey. Each day they walked farther than they believed possible. They crossed icy rivers, climbed rocky cliffs, descended dangerous slopes. Their shoes were falling apart. Their bodies were weak from months of starvation, yet they kept moving. At times they questioned whether they were walking in the right direction, so they chose to keep walking. On the 9th day of their trek, something changed. The endless snow began to disappear. Small patches of grass appeared beneath their feet. Then came flowing water, bushes, signs of life. For the first time in over 2 months, they heard birds singing. It was a sound so ordinary, yet so beautiful, that both men stopped to listen. Nature was telling them something. They were finally leaving the frozen world that had trapped them for 72 days. Then, in the distance, they saw something they had almost forgotten existed. A man, on horseback. After 9 days of crossing one of the world's most dangerous mountain ranges with almost nothing to sustain them, they had finally found another human being. But there was still one final obstacle standing between them. A roaring river that neither side could cross. Would help slip away at the very last moment? Or had the miracle finally begun? For 9 days, Nando Pardu and Roberto Canessa had crossed some of the harshest mountains on Earth. They were exhausted. Their clothes were torn. Their bodies were weakened by more than 2 months of starvation. Yet somehow, they were still walking. Then, across a fast-moving river, they saw a man on horseback. His name was Sergio Catalan, a Chilean muleteer who was tending livestock in the remote mountains. Nando and Roberto shouted with everything they had left, but the river was so loud that their voices were swallowed by the rushing water. The distance between them wasn't great, but it might as well have been a mile. Catalan could see that the two strangers were desperate, but he couldn't hear what they were saying. The river was too dangerous to cross. As darkness began to fall, he signaled for them to wait until morning. For Nando and Roberto, it was one of the longest nights of their lives. They had finally found another human being, but they still had no way to explain who they were or where the others were waiting. The next morning, Catalan came back. This time, he had an idea. He tied a pencil and a sheet of paper to a rock and threw it across the river. Nando quickly picked it up. With trembling hands, he wrote one of the most famous messages in survival history. I come from a plane that crashed in the mountains. I am Uruguayan. We have been walking for 10 days. There are 14 injured people at the plane. We need help quickly. We have no food. We are weak. Please come for us. He wrapped the note around the rock and threw it back across the river. In that moment, he realized he was witnessing what many believed was impossible. The passengers of Flight 571 were alive. Without wasting time, Sergio Catalan rode for hours across rough mountain terrain to alert the authorities. The rescue operation began immediately. News spread rapidly across Chile, Uruguay, and Argentina. People who had long believed the passengers were dead could hardly believe what they were hearing. On December 22, 1972, 70 days after the crash, helicopters flew toward the crash site. The weather in the Andes was unpredictable, and the high altitude made flying extremely difficult. When the first helicopter finally appeared above the valley, the survivors couldn't believe their eyes. Some cried, some laughed, others simply stood in silence, too overwhelmed to speak. After 72 days trapped on a frozen mountain, rescue had finally arrived. Because of weight limits and the dangerous flying conditions, only part of the group could be evacuated on the first day. The remaining survivors spent one final night on the mountain. This time, however, they knew it would be their last. Out of the 45 people who boarded Flight 571, only 16 survived. They had endured 72 days in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The world celebrated what newspapers quickly called the miracle of the Andes. But celebrations soon turned into controversy. When journalists learned that the survivors had stayed alive by eating the bodies of those who had died, headlines around the world exploded. Many people rushed to judge them. Others couldn't imagine making such a decision. The survivors chose to tell the truth. They explained that no one had been harmed for food. Every person they ate had already died from the crash, their injuries, or the avalanche. It had been a decision made only after exhausting every other possibility. Many religious leaders, including representatives of the Catholic Church, publicly expressed understanding, describing their actions as an act of survival under the most extreme circumstances imaginable rather than a moral failure. Over time, public opinion shifted. As people learned the full story, condemnation gave way to compassion. The world began to see the survivors not as monsters, but as ordinary young men forced into an impossible situation. Nando Pardue became an international motivational speaker, sharing lessons about courage, hope, and perseverance. Roberto Canessa fulfilled his dream of becoming a respected pediatric cardiologist, saving the lives of countless children. The survivors remained closely connected, returning to the crash site over the years to remember their friends and family. High in the Andes, a simple memorial now stands where the aircraft came to rest. It bears the names of those who lost their lives, not as victims, but as people whose sacrifice helped others survive. More than 50 years later, the story still captures the imagination of millions around the world. Books have been written, documentaries have been produced, movies have recreated the ordeal for new generations. Yet no film or photograph can fully capture what those 16 survivors endured. Their story is more than a tale of survival. It is a testament to friendship, to faith, to sacrifice, and to the incredible strength of the human spirit. Because when everything else was taken from them, food, comfort, even hope, they discovered that the strongest force of all was the determination to keep living. The Andes tested every limit of the human body, but they also revealed something extraordinary about the human heart. Sometimes, survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about refusing to give up, even when the entire world believes you're already gone. Thank you for watching. If this incredible true story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. There are many more forgotten stories of survival, courage, and resilience waiting to be uncovered. Until next time, stay curious.